don't believe him. It's much more complicated than that. It's much more complicated. I think that it was one American Secretary of State who said, I would like to talk with the European Union, but I don't know which phone number to call. And it's still not clear exactly which phone number you have to call when you want to talk with the European Union. Because the European Union is a complex, is a club of member states. A club, more than a club. It's a gathering of member states which have decided to put together some of their sovereignties. Monetary one is the most clear one, with the central bank and others. And to keep for them other part of their sovereignty, in particular foreign policy and defense policy, which are clearly state-owned competences. But at the same time, they decided to try to build a common foreign policy and a common security policy. But as you understand, common doesn't mean unique. I share something with you, but I don't share other things. Which is the commonality? Well, this is a difficult thing to answer. In some cases, it's a clear position, and in others, there are as many positions as member states. Look at the last vote at the United Nations General Assembly about the Arab countries' initiative with respect to the truce or the ceasefire or whatever you want to call it in Gaza. 4 voted against, 8 voted in favor, and 14 abstained. A clear example that there is not a common position. And when there is not a common position, each one keeps its own position, and I, as a spokesperson for the common position, has not a lot to say, because there is not such a common position. But the important thing is not to announce the common policy or the common position, but to try to build it, to try to put people together, to see why there are different visions and how we can overcome these visions in order to have a common position. Sometimes it's not possible. The differences are very big. Others, there is a natural understanding and a common position. Well, the same thing happened with the monetary policy. Today, everybody knows that the members of the Eurozone share a common currency, a common and unique, because they don't have other. But for many years, we had a common currency, which was called ECU, but was not unique. And we had at the same time our national currency. In Spain we had the peseta, in France they have the franc, and we share a common currency which was not unique, but how do you manage to have each one its own currency and at the same time to share a common one? Well, with a complex system of equivalences, maybe some of you remember the snake in the tunnel, meaning that there were going to be some oscillations with respect to the central value of the common currency, but these oscillations should not overpass a certain limit. It was a tunnel and a snake, showing that each currency has to keep a certain value with respect to the common, the euro. Well, more or less we are trying to do the same thing, with the difference that there is the tunnel is very wide, and the positions diverge, in some cases 100%, because someone says yes and others says no. This is the way we work, and then you have the complex institutional setting. We have a commission, which is executive power, for the competences that has been communalized, not for the others. And we have a council that is the real master of the European Union, because it's the member states who gather together in order to fix guidelines that then we try to implement them. And in this complex environment, in a complex world, it's becoming more and more difficult to fix a position which can be implementable, not just in a matter of principles, but in action. This introduction is to give an answer to the fact that who is speaking on behalf of the European Union. Well, it depends on what. It depends on what. And even I can say it depends when. And it depends also on the permanent fight on the political sense of the word, between this complex institutional setting, which are the competencies of the member states and which are the competencies of the Commission. It's defined in the treaties, but as any legal definition, there are overlaps, and there is the critical political pressure for one side on the other to have the lead. And this is especially true when we talk about the more political things, the more this institutional controversy sometimes appears. And then there is the Parliament. Don't forget about the Parliament, who is the co-legislator for many things, not for all, but for many, and who is the co-budgetary authority. The budget has to be approved by the Parliament and by the Council, both. Both have to agree. And what happens when they disagree? Well, then there is discussions, the Commission intervenes, but the decision is not to the Commission, the decision is to the Council and the Parliament, the two co-legislators. And sometimes the Parliament has a view and the Council has another view. Member states diverge, differ, and I receive criticism from both sides, from the side of the Parliament and from the side of member states. So this is a difficult job, but it is more and more difficult because the world is more and more complicated. When I came here 4 years ago, things were much easier. But since then, we had a pandemic and we had two wars. The war of Russia and Ukraine and the current war or the conflict between Palestine and Israel, but many others. And the human rights are being more and more violated. And I cannot say that the world is driving to a future based on peace and cooperation. By the contrary, I see more and more human rights abuses and less cooperation. At the institutions, for example, you see the Security Council, there are more and more vetoes and less agreements. And then it has to go to the United Nations General Assembly, where there is not the veto but the majority, but without executive capacity. Although the executive capacity of the decision of the Security Council is also quite theoretical, because there are a lot of resolutions which are being voted, agreed, but not implemented. And the last one is the request for a ceasefire in Gaza, which has been voted at the Security Council, but not implemented. All that is in the middle of a big world turmoil, and the 75th anniversary of the human rights. 25 years of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and the Rome Statute, and the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration. And in order to celebrate that, the other day I bought a book which is a practical guide to humanitarian law. Because we talk about humanitarian law. We talk about the respect of international law, including humanitarian law. We talk about it, but to tell the truth, every time I ask for a legal advice about how humanitarian law is being implemented, I have so different views that I decided to buy a book like this, a practical guide to humanitarian law, in order to be able to understand which is the content of this Human Rights Defenders Declaration, the Rome Statute, which is the role of the International Criminal Court, how does it work, the Rome Statute, so many conflicts around the world, what is a war crime, who has to decide if something is a war crime in the legal sense of the word, where does human rights start, who is violating them, who are defending them. And this is part of my portfolio, and we have here our special representative for human rights, and we have a lot of resources devoted to defend human rights and to defend the defenders of human rights. So the difficulties of the time in which we are living could only encourage us to continue defending human rights globally, because what we are seeing is the return of brutal power politics. And more conflicts are being solved by the use of force, something that was supposed to be forbidden, not the use of force to solve conflicts. But what I see is that more and more conflicts are being solved by force. Look, at example, has happened in Azerbaijan, Armenia. A long frozen conflict that suddenly has been, I wouldn't say solved, but decisively determined by a military intervention that in 1 week made 150,000 people having to move. In 1 week. Like this, 150,000 people had to abandon their houses and run. And the international community regretted, expressed concern, sent humanitarian support, but it happens by the use of force. And this is an example, one more recent example. But look what's happening in Sudan, what has happened in Ethiopia, what's happening in Sahel, what's still happening in many Latin American countries where violence increases. I remember Costa Rica was supposed to be the Switzerland of Latin America. When you have a look at the number of criminal acts happening in Costa Rica 20 years from now and today, is skyrocketing. Drug has a lot of things to do with that. Many countries around the world are being destabilized by the fact that drugs dealers are so powerful. I made a phone call, I kept going out of my paper, I made a phone call to the new recently elected president of Ecuador. Remember that the candidate of his political party was killed assassinated during the campaign. And he told me, you know how many tons of drugs is being exported from Ecuador? It's an estimation, certainly, because there is no records, obviously. 2,000 tons. You know how much does it cost a ton of drug in Europe? Between 50 and 100. 50 millions, 100 millions. Multiply. It makes the amount of cash generated by the drug traffics is 2 times the GNP of the country. Someone has in cash 2 times, twice the GNP of the country. How do you fight against it? How do you ensure the rule of law? How do you ensure that this money is not being used to corrupt anyone? From the most humble policeman or policewoman to the highest rank of the political structure. Yes, the drugs are something that are rooting the political structure of many countries around the world, in particular in concrete this part of the world, in South America, but also in Africa. So yes, we see a regression in human rights. We see increasing violence and increasing inequality. we see this information. Take care with the images that you see in the social networks. Verify them before widespreading, because maybe they are false. And I see in my case some moments in which I said, look at that. And 5 minutes later, my team said, shh, this is not what you think it is. The image is real, but it did not happen there. What it doesn't happen yesterday, it happened somewhere else many years ago. And it's been widespread, and people believe it. And how do we fight against this wave of disinformation with information? And democracy is a system that works with information. Information is the engine of democracy. People are being called to choose, but when you make a choice, it's because you know the properties of the options. You have to be able to make a judgment, and your judgments that are done on your perception, which is always particular and maybe not significative, and on the reality of things. And one of the biggest problems that we have today is the wave of disinformation and people presenting bad solutions to real problems, what we call populism and extremism. And all that with some structural problems that everybody is talking about, like the climate change. Everybody is in the Gulf today talking about climate change problems. This is a security problem. Climate creates insecurity. It's creating migration. It's people in the move. If you cannot cultivate your piece of land, you will have to leave. That's what's happening in some parts of the world. And migration is being pushed by climate, the fight for natural resources. Climate has become an existential threat, and not for tomorrow. It's right now. But certainly tomorrow will still be worse. Unhappily, human rights and international law are always the first casualty of wars or military coups. Since I am here in Brussels, I don't know how many military coups I've been witnessing. In some parts of the world, it's a domino effect. One country starts and then all others follow. I am thinking on the Sahel area, which is leaking to the Gulf of Guinea. Who remembers what's happening in Kabul? Afghanistan has disappeared of the media. In Afghanistan, you have a gender apartheid. I think this is a good way of calling what's happening there, a gender apartheid. Not by the color of the skin, but by gender. Women and girls are deprived from going to the school, and an awful dictatorship is ruling the country. What's happening in Tigray? Hundreds of thousands of people have died on the civil wars inside Ethiopia. First with the Tigray, after with Amara. What's happening in Sudan, where at least 3 low wars are fighting against each other just to try to keep power. And each one of them being supported by some of the neighbors. One neighbor supports one, other neighbor supports other. And do you remember Darfur? Well, Darfur, the awful crisis in Darfur is coming back. And there are hundreds of thousands of people, refugees, flying from Sudan war and going to neighborhood Chad or Ethiopia. Or look at what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we try to send an electoral observation mission. In fact, they were there. And they had to withdraw this mission because the conditions were not met in order to deploy these people in a meaningful way. They were there, more than 50 members, some of them members of the European Parliament, and unhappily had to withdraw because the conditions to to hold this observation mission were not met, or in Myanmar, or in Syria. And today, the terrible developments that continue unfolding in Israel and Palestine, started with this terrorist attack that killed 102,000 people, in 200 hostages, certainly an act of terror against civilians, defenseless. And then we have witnessed what, this was a carnage, but what we are witnessing in Gaza is another carnage. How many victims? We don't know. Nobody knows. Someone estimates it's about 15,000, but I'm afraid that below the rubble of the houses destroyed, it must be many more, with a high number of children. So, sorry?
People are leaving the room. Keep on going.
People are leaving the room?
Yes.
Why? Maybe I said some inconvenience, but the United Nations has clearly said that what's happening in one case was a carnage, and what's happening in Gaza is another one. It's another one, because one cannot accept this high number of civilian casualties. Even, obviously, Israel has to defend itself. As I said, one horror cannot justify another. It was a horror, but one horror cannot justify another. And the international community more and more are raising their voices, asking for this horror to stop. I travel to the region, I meet with the Israelis and Palestinian leadership and many other regional actors, and on that we have a concrete agenda. We are asking for the free of all hostages, to put an end to this man-made humanitarian catastrophe, to look for a solution for the day after, stop the illegal settlements and the aggressions against Palestinians in the West Bank. When the Oslo Agreement were signed 30 years ago, there were 4 times less settlers in the West Bank than today, which makes the two-state solution much more difficult. To avoid the spillover of this conflict in the region, which is becoming more and more difficult too, because you see the Houthis launching rockets against Israel and affecting the freedom of navigation in the Gulf. To combat anti-Semitism, also Islamophobia and Palestinophobia in Europe and elsewhere. I think that one has the right to criticize the state of Israel, the government of the state of Israel, without being qualified as anti-Semitism. I can disagree of how a government behaves without being qualified of anti-something. I can criticize the Franco government in my country when it was a dictatorship without being anti-Spanish. I can disagree of what is happening in some place without being anti this place. And in particular, I ask for the right to defend a two-state solution without being against the existence of the state of Israel. So we have to continue working in order that the regional and international partners look for a political solution that it can be this two-state solution, but the debate is open. If someone has other solutions, please, let's discuss about it. Because either there is two states, either there is one state, either there is not state at all. And I wouldn't like Gaza to become a new Mogadishu or a place without law and order, which could be the cradle for all kind of violence and terrorist movement and irregular migration. All that is very complicated, And I think that we have to go to the essentials. And the essential is that we need a rules-based order. We need rules, because without rules, the ones who suffer more is the weak people. La loi protège. La loi n'opprime pas, la loi protège. C'est l'absence de loi qui opprime. It's lawless. When there is no law, when there is no freedom, when there is no protection of the more vulnerable, then this is the worst of the possible situations. And that's why we have to stand everywhere, every time, in front of everybody, for international law and the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, be it in Ukraine, in Israel, in Gaza, in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Sahel, in Belarus. I haven't mentioned Belarus, Syria, or Myanmar. And I think that we have also to avoid that all these conflicts converge on a greater conflict. We have to avoid what someone called the West against the rest, which is a minimalist way of looking at the world. The West. The West covers from Alaska to Japan, so it's not exactly where is the West. The West is not a geographical denomination. The West is a group of people that share some political and economic organization. And the rest, what is the rest? The rest is too heterogeneous to be considered as a political actor. There are the BRICS, there are the Global South, different multipolarities that sometimes converge to this clash of civilizations that we try to avoid. And now I am afraid it's coming back again. So I ask to all of you to do your best in order to avoid a global clash and to try to face each one of the challenges we are facing on its own circumstances. I wouldn't say on its merit, because there is no merit, but a specific situation. And keep the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a groundbreaking document, the basis of everything that has to deal with equal dignity and equal rights for every human being, which is easy to say and very difficult to make a reality for everyone. And that's why it's good that we stand here. And it's the basis for many of the activities of the European Union around the world. In particular, the European Union is very much engaged on fighting against gender inequality. We are very much engaged against violence against women and girls, because the figures are really shocking. Globally, it is said that about 1 out of 3 million women, 1 out of 3, have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or by a former partner. They are not victims of a war in the hands of someone that they never met before. It is their partners, and sometimes they are intimate partners. We try to support the fight against violence against women, but it is rooted in structural inequality in our societies. It is not something that happens by cultural reasons. It's a structural issue which has deep roots, and all of us have a responsibility to address it. In order to fight against these problems, 3 years ago, already 3 years ago, we established the global human rights sanction regime as an essential tool. And I would like to extend this regime by another listing at the next Foreign Affairs ministers, where almost every meeting we come with a list of people that has to be sanctioned under the sanction regime. It's one of our tools. It's certainly not enough, but it is what we can do. And on the next Foreign Affairs Council, we will discuss another package affecting people that some years ago was not imaginable that this could happen. Well, it's also important that the young people remain engaged on that. We try also to support the young people engaged on defending human rights. I'm not going to explain all what we do. I'm sure someone has explained you before. But I think that we have to pay special attention to defend the defenders, of human rights, because they are often the first victims of their activities. They take a great personal risk. Last year, I remember some activists that were killed in Honduras, but I can say so many people around the world. The number is already shocking. We have been helping about 4,000 human rights defenders, which are at risk. We have a concrete mechanism to support them, our Protect Defenders mechanism. And I know this is a drop of water in the ocean because our financial resources are limited. And I am saying to you that we allocate 500 million euros to fight against violence against women globally, 500 million for the whole world. Well, it's not going to certainly solve the problem, but it may help. It may help, and in particular, this can be the seed in order for many people engage on this fight. And I have to thank you because I'm sure you are strongly engaged on that, and you represent a positive change in the life of so many people around the world. Because yes, maybe sometimes it's a drop of water in the ocean, but this drop of water can save a life here and there. And many drops of water may save many lives and create a wave that mobilizes people around the world in order to make it a better place to live, with equal dignity and equal rights for every human being. The other day I was in Washington and I visited the museum of, they don't call it the Museum of Slavery, they use a more less controversial word. I think it's the Museum of American History, but in fact it's the history of slavery. And it was not so long ago. It was not 500 years ago. And when one realizes what the human being has been able to do to other human beings, at a moment when the Christianity has been widespreading the values of universal love, and it's really, really appalling, really shocking. And that's why I think that people like you have a lot of work to do. I thank for that, and I hope we will be able to support you as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you.